Before talking about the quad, I want to talk about this thing real quick. So I'm always on the lookout for new stuff. I even take a look at all the box goggles, and that weird Eachine VR 800 or something pair is actually, I think it's the most popular box goggle pair in the world. But this thing, I took a look at this thing because it has a couple interesting features. So first of all, it's from FXT, which are now making goggles apparently. And the biggest reason why I wanted to take a look at it is because I know there's a lot of people that wear glasses and you want to use your glasses with goggles. And this pair lets you do, like, it fits over your face in such a way that you can use your glasses. And I know it's using a mirror. You can see it's a mirror in there. And I previously reviewed like an Eachine pair that was awful with a mirror in there, but this is actually well positioned. And then something else interesting, the goggle itself is actually just separate from the screen. And the screen is really good actually because it's got diversity. It has a DVR built in, has an HDMI in, and it's got functionality on the back with this button thing. So overall, it's a wonky pair of goggles. It works surprisingly well for how wonky it is, and I really only have two negative things to say about it. First and foremost being that it's massive, but it is like a box goggle-esque style, and they used a USB port to power the thing, but in order to power this, they included this adapter wire, and you actually need to use a minimum of 2S to make this thing work. So I don't know why they used a mini USB or a micro USB to make it work. Here I am in the bright sun, and you can see the picture is nice. The screen is actually really nice. I'm gonna put it inside this so that you can see what it looks like. All right, now let's take a look. This is in the bright sun, so the goggles work nicely. I have to say that the mirror in there is not a glass mirror. It's actually a plastic mirror, so the mirror isn't perfect. It does have some minor wobble-ish kind of quality to it, but you don't really notice it when you're actually flying. So if you need a pair of goggles that you have to wear glasses for, this is probably the best option I've found so far. But now let's go over the quad, and there is actually a lot to discuss with this quad. So like I said, I'm always looking at new things, always looking at cheap things, expensive things, everything under the sun. And I built this quad just to test a bunch of stuff that I haven't used before. So I have motors that are super ultra cheap. I have the Caddx camera, which I previously didn't like any Caddx cameras. And I have some weird flight control, which I don't even know what it is, but it's a F4 and a VTX combination board. And I have a $28 4-in-1 ESC in there. But let's first talk about the motors. These are the DYS Wei 2207 motors. These are $10 motors, $9.99. Now I know Racerstar makes a $5 motor, and I've tried a lot of Racerstar motors, and they're generally just really trashy motors. Nothing about them is good. They're not well engineered, not well designed. I know they're making a cheap motor, but at the minimum they can actually think about the design and actually make it good rather than just whatever, just making a whatever motor that works. But that's what DYS has done. DYS OEMs a lot of motors that we don't even know which ones they are, but they have taken garbage components and engineered them such that they actually work pretty decently. So the motor is $10. You cannot expect the world for $10, but it's pretty darn good still. So starting off with the aluminum, it is not the softest aluminum. This metal is definitely not the lowest quality, but it's definitely not the highest quality because it's a $10 motor. You're not getting 70-75 aluminum. You're getting 60-65 aluminum, which is just fine. It is more liable to bend, but it's a $10 motor. And then the next worst thing about this motor, actually there's three bad things. First is the metal. Second are the bearings. Actually, the bearings are probably the worst thing about these motors. The bearings they come pre-broken. So I have 4 motors here. 3 of them are pretty okay. One of them, let me see if I can get you to hear it. Can you hear that rolly noise? That rolly noise that you hear, if your motors start making that noise, that means that your bearings are probably bent or cracked. And I mean the balls inside the actual bearing. And the bearings on this are, so the motor has a 3mm shaft, which I'll get to, but the bearings are 8mm outer diameter, 3mm inner diameter, which means that the bearings are actually larger than the vast majority of high-end motors, because high-end motors usually use a 4mm shaft all the way through the motor. and so the bearings are still 8mm outer diameter. That means the inner diameter is 4mm, and the ball bearings inside the actual bearing are much smaller. Smaller bearings don't take punishment as nicely as big ball bearings, but all this is moot because these are the lowest quality bearings I have ever felt on any motor, and that is the worst part. But it's not a killer. It's definitely not a killer of the motor. Clearly it flies very well, as you saw, and I'll get to the performance of them a little bit later again. But let's continue with the motor. So the shaft is not hardened steel. It's just regular steel, so it will bend, and it's a 3mm shaft. It's not a 4mm shaft, and it is a clip retained bell. But again, it's a $10 motor, so you're probably not going to be replacing bells very often. You can clearly see that the windings are multi-stranded, and I've said in previous videos, getting higher quality thin wire is cheaper than getting high quality thick wire. So with cheap motors, or motors in general, because everything in our hobby is pretty much just a cheap item, you're probably better off with multi-stranded windings, unless if they've been very carefully and delicately engineered to be high performance and high quality. So DYS has gone with multi-stranded windings of probably the lowest quality that they could find anywhere. The magnets are absolutely not the strongest magnets. They are square magnets. They are not curved magnets. They are actually thick. They are at least 1.9mm thick, and Ryan Harrell of Mini Quad Test Bench has told me that magnets up to 1.8mm actually do a lot, but after you pass that 1.8mm thickness, the performance starts to taper off kind of drastically. And so DYS has gone with at least 1.8mm thick. I measured 1.8, 1.9, somewhere in that vicinity, thicker magnets. They're not the thinnest magnets, and that probably has a lot to do with the performance of this motor. You can clearly see the air gap is not stellar, the magnets are not curved, and there's another very nice feature on the bottom of the bell. There is a lip underneath the magnets so that the magnets can't slip. I don't know why every single motor manufacturer doesn't do this. The motors are all well balanced. Surprisingly, they're all very well balanced. They're all about the same level of balance as well, which is more than sufficient. So what DYS has done here is that they have engineered a motor with the lowest grade stuff, not the absolute lowest, but pretty low grade stuff, and made it perform stellar. DYS has actually paid attention here and made a motor that's cheap but performs really well. It's not the most durable, not the best all around, but if you're going for a cheap build, gosh, like I'm really like surprised at how good this motor is. You will not, even if you moved from these cheap motors to a high price motor, you're not gonna notice all that much performance difference. And the motor comes in a 2306 size as well. I don't know why they made a 2206, but it comes in a 2306 size as well. So someone at DYS is thinking, so I thank them very much for that. So a final word on these motors and why this quad of all quads is now one of my favorite quads. First and foremost, these motors perform excellent, and the whole quad performs right on par with my favorite quads from the past, so that's a huge plus. Next, I know I'm not going to have noise issues down the line with these motors because the magnets are not super strong, the air gap is not super tight, and the magnets aren't curved, so the motors just don't create a lot of noise. There's two things I'm primarily worried about. I know that if I kind of tap a pole or a bar or something hard with the top of the bell with the prop shaft, I will probably bend 3mm non-hardened steel shaft inside the stator. And secondly, the C-clip on the bottom of the shaft is so tiny that I'm kind of worried that it might pop off. And one person actually said that it will pop off. I don't know what these motors are going to be like after 100 flights, but I've already flown them for about 20 packs, and they are the same as they were when I first put them on the quad. I have crashed them, but I don't crash super hard. They're usually just bumps and tumbles. So no problems yet. I will definitely report if I have problems down the road. Next, let's talk about the flight controller real quick. So this is a random flight controller, and the only reason that I picked this flight controller is because I wanted to try one of these combo boards, one of the ones with the VTX and the flight controller built in one. And I also knew that I was getting the RunCam DVR here, so I wanted to use the back of my quad, the 20x20 pattern for that, and I didn't have space for a VTX, so I decided to get this because I knew it was going to be a low noise build, because what wide air gaps on motors do and square magnets they reduce the noise of the motor, which again I'll get to at the end of when I've done discussing all this. So the flight controller works flawlessly. It is a standard Betaflight, Butterflight, whatever flight controller. I would not recommend it because having a VTX and a flight controller combo is just not a good idea. VTXs burn out. They're not bulletproof. The only one that I know of that is pretty bulletproof is the Unify. I've never had a Unify break on me for any reason other than physical that I've caused myself. So I would recommend the Unify, but not this one. So if they built a Unify into a flight controller, then I would recommend that, but definitely not this combo board. Use something else. Yes, this does work. You can pick it up and it's fine. I'm going to be talking about longevity. I'm going to keep this quad. I'm going to keep flying it as my main quad for a while now to see what the longevity of all these components are, but I really wouldn't recommend this flight controller. And now let's talk about the ESC board. So this board is manufactured by Airbot. I think it's designed and manufactured by Airbot. It has been rebranded by dozens of brands. It has been sold from everywhere from $28 up to $55. I think I even saw a $60 one. As far as I can tell, they are all the exact same board. And the reason why I even paid any attention to this board to begin with is because it's using these wide flat FETs. And this is really anecdotal. It's just based on my experience, but I've used a lot of 4-in-1 ESCs, and the ones that I have found to perform more consistently and good are the ones with these wide flat FETs. Now that doesn't mean all the little ones are bad. The Hobbywing 4-in-1 is excellent, and a lot of these little 20x20 boards are actually fantastic. But I've had more consistent results with these wide flat FETs, and it's the same kind of FETs that are being used on the Acon 4-in-1. And I have to say that this board performs pretty much on par with the Acon 32-bit 6S 35 amp 4-in-1, but it's $28 instead of $66, $67. So I have kind of a way of rating ESC boards. I look at two primary factors. Number one, does it actually deliver the power? When I punch the gas, does it actually give me the full beans? And immediately I can usually tell if it's not, or if the board is being pushed past its limit, or if the rating is ridiculous. That's what I could tell on the HGLRC board. When they said it can do 6S and I put it on 6S, I'm like, okay, no, this is definitely not a 6S board. It works okay on 4S, but it still doesn't give you the full beans on 4S. Number one is the performance, is the power delivery. Number two is the consistency among the ESC within itself. Now, I've used a lot of the Acon 4-in-1 ESC. I can tell you that the consistency on that board across multiple boards is very good. It's not 100%. I would say it's about 8.5 to 9 out of 10. If that's that number, I would rate this board at about a 7.5 to 8.5. Probably right in that 8 region. It's not quite as good, although I've only used one board. I don't know how the consistency will be across multiple boards. Another thing that you have to pay attention to, unfortunately, is that on low-end ESCs, they're using recycled components, and there is no doubt in my mind that every single component on this board has been recycled, including the FETs. But if they're using FETs that are capable well past the board's limit, it shouldn't really be a problem, and I feel like that's probably what they're doing here. All that being said, I have received a lot of feedback from people that have commented and said that they've used this board. I've had exactly one person tell me that they burnt out one board, and another person tell me that they cracked the board in half and they broke it. And I didn't even ask for this feedback, but people started telling me, so I figured I would tell you guys. Almost everybody has said that the board is excellent, and there has been kind of a divide between people saying that it's a noisy board or not a noisy board. So I've specifically put this board on this quad with these motors because I knew that they were going to be low noise motors. I knew that they had weak magnets, they had wide air gap, they had square magnets. I knew that they were not going to produce that kind of electrical noise back into the system. So I am not noticing any noise at all, zero. The board is working flawlessly. I am extremely impressed. I cannot say enough good things about it. It's a $28 board. I do still have to test the longevity. I've only flown it on 4S and 5S. It handles 4S and 5S beautifully. I'm going to get more of the $28 version. I'm going to build some 6S quads with it, and I will definitely report back. But so far, I mean, this is a massive thumbs up from me at this point, and I'm blown away. I'm totally blown away by this ESC board and the motors. And now let's look at this Caddx camera, which is surprise number 3. So previously I've tried a couple Caddx cameras. I haven't really been a huge fan. Their light-dark transitions have been a little bit weird. Their field of view of the lenses and the sensor combination have been a little bit odd. It doesn't seem like they're using the same sensors as RunCam and Foxeer. Maybe they are, maybe they're just tweaking them, maybe it's just a software difference, but I haven't been a huge fan of them. And I pretty much picked this camera because it was the most expensive camera that they made. I don't know if it's new, I don't know if it's old, but I like it. I like it a lot. I like it enough to say that this is either my #1 or #2 preferred camera now, and I prefer it over everything other than the Micro Eagle. The Micro Eagle is the only other camera that can compare against this camera. So let's do exactly that. Let's compare it to the Micro Eagle. What I noticed between this camera and the Micro Eagle is that, first and foremost, the Micro Eagle has a 1/2-inch sensor with a massive lens. So it has a leg up on every single camera in the field. But this camera has better HDR. You can definitely see the darks better than in the Micro Eagle. Even though the Micro Eagle has really good HDR, it's not as good as this camera. This camera looks more crisp to me. The Micro Eagle definitely looks like it has more detail in the picture. Like I can see more things in the picture, but the way the Caddx camera handles sharpening in the goggles looks more crisp to me, and I actually like it more. And I think it's also a combination between how it's handling sharpening and the HDR qualities of the camera. So that's a huge plus. The biggest downfall of this camera is low light. So like I said, the Micro Eagle has a huge leg up on every other camera because it has a 1/2-inch sensor. Everything else has a 1/3-inch sensor. It has a much bigger sensor on the Micro Eagle with a much bigger lens, so the low light performance of the Micro Eagle is absolutely unmatched. There is no camera that I've seen so far that can even begin to compare against the Micro Eagle. But in the daytime, I prefer this camera. And I prefer it for the reasons that I've already stated, plus one more. It does have better HDR, and the image is generally brighter overall. It's hard to say why that is, but I've noticed something between CMOS cameras and CCD cameras. So CCD cameras just in general tend to have a brighter image. And when you use a DVR, an onboard DVR with a CCD camera, even the HMDVR that I previously said it dims your video, you don't actually notice the dimming at all because the image coming out of the camera is already so bright. The Micro Eagle and other CMOS cameras, like the Predator as well, they tend to have a dimmer image, and it's kind of weird and kind of annoying. I don't know how to explain it, but particularly with the Predator and the Micro Eagle, when I used the HMDVR, I saw a very, very obvious dimming of the view, of my actual goggle view, so I didn't like it at all. And I think that's why other people weren't noticing that dimming that I was noticing, because they were using CCD cameras and it was perfectly fine for them. And with this, on the RunCam, it's the new RunCam DVR, onboard DVR, I don't notice any dimming at all. There's zero. I've turned it on and off and it's perfect. I don't know if that's because of the camera or the RunCam DVR, but it might be because of the DVR, although I asked RunCam about that feature and they didn't really know what I was talking about, so I can only assume that they haven't really taken that into consideration and done anything to, guard against it or protect against it. Anyways, back to the Caddx camera. I like this camera a lot. I would put it on par with the Micro Eagle. The Micro Eagle only does better in low light. I think this camera is better than the sorry to say it, but I think it's better than the Predator for me. The Predator still has better HDR. It has better HDR than any camera out there, but the HDR in this Caddx camera is not as exaggerated, as over-exaggerated as the Predator, so I appreciate that, and it still looks really crisp, really, really nice. And the worst thing I can say about this camera is that it does 4.3 and 16:9, but the way it does 16:9 is just by cropping the top and bottom of the 4.3 image. So forget 16:9. You're going to use this camera in 4.3 only, and to me it's only a 4.3 camera. It's not a 16:9 camera. And last but not least, the RunCam DVR. It records at 640 by 480 and just under 25 frames per second. It actually has a lower bit rate and a lower resolution than the HMDVR from Banggood or wherever else. I can't really tell. Unless you're using Micro Eagle, you really can't tell a difference at all, and there's no real use to the 720p of the HMDVR unless you're using at least the Micro Eagle or something that actually give out a little bit better resolution. This DVR records immediately when you plug in the battery, so right there I'm going to say it's got a huge advantage over the HMDVR, because you do have to push the button to record on the HMDVR, but in order to save the file, you do have to push this annoying little tiny button right there, that little button right there. You do have to push it in order to get it to stop and actually record. It does record in 5-minute intervals, so it'll record a 5-minute video and then it'll stop and start recording again. There are a couple frames, or actually like half a second lost between the stop and start, and if you don't push that stop button and unplug your battery in less than 5 minutes, you do not save any file. So that's the biggest annoyance. I cannot tell if it causes dimming because I haven't used it on enough cameras, but so far it seems to be working flawlessly with the Caddx camera. And yeah, it's fine. If you're looking for a DVR, I actually recommend this one over the HMDVR, primarily because it has this little tray. It comes with this little clip here that when you put the memory card in, this prevents it from popping out. And it's been a number of times where I've crashed and the SD card has actually popped out of whatever item it's in, whatever gadget it's in, and I've lost the SD card. Well, I haven't lost it, I've actually found them all, thankfully, but you could definitely lose a SD card. So thankfully it has that little clip and it doesn't fall out. I hope this video was informational and helpful. There's kind of a lot. I don't even know how I talk about these things for so long. Everything that you see is in a link in the description below. Anyways, take care. Don't forget to floss.